Tell us a little bit more about this barometer then, and before we talk about what it shows, because it's quite new. What's it trying to measure?
Good morning, Anna. Well, we've been working for the last 2-3 years on this trade barometer, and we've launched it for the first time in the beginning of this year. What we do is we check from different sources that we have either internally or market data together with Accenture. We have a big database which we use with artificial intelligence to predict for the month and the following next 3 months how the air freight and ocean freight volumes will develop based on 7 countries. These 7 countries are approximately 80% of global trade, and we believe this is a very powerful instrument which we can use internally but also give to our customers.
Okay, so world trade, according to this barometer then, world trade is expected to continue growing. The reading well above 50 tells us that, but it is expected to grow at a slightly slower pace. Why so?
Well, what we've seen in the past is that we had a really strong growth. We had, for certain countries, very high growth rates. When, as you rightfully said, everything above 50% is growth. We see now a slowdown, but we are still in a growth mode. If you take the European summer, which was very hot this year, we would say we're still in nice temperatures, and we are feeling comfortable with what the barometer is showing us going forward for the next months.
And where is this weakness coming from, though? I appreciate things are still expected to grow, but at a slightly slower pace. So if something is slowing, what is it that's slowing then, Tim, according to your barometer?
Okay, what we see is, since we're measuring the air freight and the ocean freight, we see a larger weakness in growth on the air freight side. This is going down almost double digit, and we see a kind of softening on the ocean freight side. If we go through the 7 countries, we see that actually one country is stable, being the UK, which is interesting if you think about the discussions we are having right now around the Brexit, and maybe even a hard Brexit. We see growth in India, and India actually shows so high numbers which we haven't seen before since we started working with this. And all the other countries show a downtrend in growth, but again, it's still growing.
And in terms of, so even the areas that are showing that weakness are still growing. And what does it tell us about the type of trade, whether sea, air, land? What are the trends we're seeing there?
Well, the trends we see in sea and air is that, again, on the air freight side, it's cooling down. But we have to remember that in 2017, so last year, we had probably one of the best air freight years when it comes to growth ever. And we are probably now going back to the times which we had in the past when we have a moderate growth. Ocean freight overall is still strong. And even though we have the trade tensions and the discussions between the US and China, we still see that there is growth in the market, and we also don't feel this in our numbers at the moment.
Tim, just stay with us for a moment. I want to play a little bit of an interview that we had with the CEO of AB InBev. This is Carlos Brito talking about the impact of trade tensions on his business.
We tend to produce and sell our beers mostly in the countries as a domestic product. So we source ingredients, we manufacture and sell back to the same communities. Of course, we export and import lots of beer, but most of our business, 90% of our business, is done in one country than in the other country. So these trade conversations don't affect us as much, but of course they impact us somehow.
That was the CEO of AB InBev. And Tim, coming back to you then on this, he was talking there about how his business is structured so that they don't have to do too much trade, so he is insulated from the tensions around trade. Do you think that more businesses might start to shape themselves, shape their supply chains to enable them to sell within country, to avoid global trade, to avoid some of the tariffs that seem to be being talked about so much?
Well, it depends probably on what commodity you're producing and where you are. Probably with beer, it's more easier to do things like that than if you go to the automotive sector, where today you have really international supply chains where you can't just change a supplier from country A to country B or bring it in your country based on the quality that you would expect in your product. I mean, overall, in the freight forwarding, logistics and transportation market, we've seen changes, be it on trade wars or be it on changes that something happens in nature, like a volcano exploding a few years back in Iceland, which brings us to be very flexible and thinking of solutions for our customers. At the end of the day, that's part of the DNA of our business. And I think that's why within our world, we are very well equipped to handle these kind of changes and to handle these trade tensions.